and not seeing any line items specifically for Indigenous women in Canada is just a slap in the face.
Tonight, a closer look at the federal budget and the Trudeau Liberal agenda.
Remember Senator Lynn Beyak lobbying for all the good residential schools have done? Now the Senate's ethics officer says she crossed the line.
Indigenization and Indigenous course requirement can bring the accountability up.
And combating racism and assimilation, what it means to indigenize the University of Winnipeg.
Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen. Indigenous leaders continue to divide over yesterday's federal budget. Some say it's a champion of reconciliation, while others say it's a slap in the face. APTN's Amber Bernard has more from Ottawa.
Finance Minister Bill Morneau tabled the 2019 federal budget Tuesday. Frustration is one word Francine Joe uses to describe her feelings towards the budget.
And I'm extremely disappointed, very frustrated, because we just recently signed an accord on February 1st. We recently had a meeting with the Prime Minister, so we felt our relationship with the Government of Canada was moving forward. And not seeing any line items specifically for Indigenous women in Canada is just a slap in the face.
The Native Women's Association of Canada says if the federal government refuses to find a solution, then NWAC is ready to take it to the election polls this fall.
And if they don't have an answer, then I'm going out, as well as my provincial and territorial member associations, to ensure Indigenous women use their right to vote in the next election.
On the other hand, Manitoba Métis Federation President David Chartrand is happy with the budget announcements for the Métis Nation.
And this is when some people have said reconciliation is no longer going to be there. We lost 2 ministers. That has never been the case. The reconciliation champion is still there. He's the Prime Minister. And his commitment to the language fund shows you that they're serious about preservation of our Indigenous languages are important to maintain.
Outlined in the budget is $30 million to recognize the contribution of World War II Métis veterans. Over 70 years ago, Métis who enlisted were promised a financial package post-war. That never happened. And Chartrand has been fighting for that promise.
And the big one for me is I've been fighting for 20 years for the Métis veterans to get their justice in this country. They never received it when they got back from World War II.
While many Métis veterans have passed on, Chartrand hopes to use the money for educational purposes, like a possible trip to Juno Beach for Métis youth. Amber Bernard, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Despite their best efforts to focus on the recently rolled out election year budget, the Trudeau government continues to be dogged by questions about the SNC-Lavalin affair. Opposition protests grew louder Tuesday after the Liberal-controlled House Justice Committee shut down their probe into the case. Today, Conservative members in the House Ethics Committee are now calling for a televised meeting Thursday to examine the accusations against Prime Minister Trudeau and his allies that they conspired to stop the criminal trial of the Quebec engineering giant. In the House of Commons this afternoon, Conservative leader Andrew Scheer asked the chair of that committee, Conservative MP Bob Zimmer, about that request. Here's the exchange.
My question, therefore, is to the chair of the Standing Committee on Ethics. Can he inform this House if the future agenda of the committee will include an investigation of this matter?
The Honourable Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have received letters from 3 members of the Ethics Committee requesting an investigation into this matter. I can confirm, as Chair of the Ethics Committee, that this investigation is in order.
Important to note that finding the request in order only means the committee will discuss it when they meet. Actually, launching an investigation would require committee members to vote in favor, and the Liberals have a majority. The CEO of SNC-Lavalin is speaking out for the first time since the scandal broke. In an interview today with BNN Bloomberg, Neil Bruce says it's in the public interest for the firestorm surrounding his company to be resolved.
If you go back to 2012, we had 20,000 Canadian employees. Today we've got 9. And if we can't put some of this behind us, it's highly likely, that we'll have less. Everything that's being said is talking about things that happened 7 to 20 years ago. It didn't happen last month. It didn't happen last year. It's 7 to 20 years ago. And we are trying our best, to put all of this behind us.
Bruce also insists that he's never spoken to the Prime Minister about that legal prosecution agreement or about jobs.
The Senate's ethic officer says Senator Lynn Beyak violated the Conflict of Interest Code when she posted racist letters directed towards Indigenous people on her Senate webpage. The Office of the Senate Ethics Officer found, quote, overall, I found that Senator Beyak's testimony demonstrated a lack of awareness about racism in Canadian society. The ethics officer called on Beyak to remove the letters from her website, make a formal apology for posting them, and complete a course in cultural sensitivity with emphasis on Indigenous issues. Beyak has refused to comply with any of the remedial measures proposed. She continues to sit as a senator and collect all of the entitlements that come with sitting in the Red Chamber.
A 4-month-old baby girl has died while in a Winnipeg foster home. The death comes only a week after the Manitoba Children's Advocate issued a damning report on CFS. The report stated many children are falling through the cracks of society's safety net, just like Tina Fontaine. The advocate warned if changes are not made, more children will die. Now the family of the infant wants answers. Brittany Hobson brings us more.
The family of an infant girl says their child died while in the care of Child and Family Services.
CFS failed my daughter. They failed us. That's how I feel. And there's so many questions that I want. I need answers.
At a press conference held this week, Darlene Green told reporters her daughter Vanastasia died Monday while in a Winnipeg foster home. The girl was 4 months old.
They told us that my daughter passed away choking on her bottle or vomit.
The family is from Bloodvein First Nation, located 200 kilometers north of Winnipeg. Green says her daughter was apprehended at birth, but reasons for the apprehension are not known.
I don't know why they didn't give me a chance. They give other mothers a chance, and that was my first baby.
Martina Fisher is a former social worker and family friend. She says the family wants to focus on the larger issue at hand, the apprehension of Indigenous kids.
There is always a chance to work with the mother, to work with the family, to work with our communities.
The Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Women's Council organized the press conference. Chief Francine Meaches of Swan Lake First Nation says the province should hand over jurisdiction to First Nations.
Something needs to change here. We've been working as a team, our Women's Council, been trying to change legislation in this country, in our province. And we're struggling with that because nobody seems to see what the need is.
According to the province, there are 10,328 kids in care. Approximately 90% of them are Indigenous. The family says if things don't change, more deaths will occur.
And she's not going to be the last if somebody doesn't do something about this.
In a statement, Families Minister Heather Stephenson said, "Our condolences go to the extended family, caregivers, and those who are involved in this child's life. We know the CFS agency and authority responsible for the child's care are gathering information to find the family the answers it needs." A spokesperson for the Southern First Nations Network of Care, which oversees the agency, says they cannot comment on the case. Winnipeg Police Service say they are investigating the death to determine if there was any wrongdoing. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Dozens of Iqaluit residents were searching the city today for an 18-year-old man who went missing last week. Amber Roy was supposed to board a flight to leave Iqaluit on March 12th. He didn't make that flight and was spotted at the airport the following 2 days. Police say, though, that he didn't fly out of town. RCMP believe that Roy is still in Iqaluit, and today's search did not turn up anything of interest. Police urge him or his friends to reach out and say if he's okay. The weather in Iqaluit for right now is -33 Celsius. One of Nunavut's Inuit groups is proposing a novel way to combat hunger in the territory. They want hunting to be a paid job. The agency QIA represents Inuit living in Baffin Island, and their latest report, they say that they want to shift from food security to food sovereignty. To help with the food supply, they are calling for hunters to be recognized and paid as professionals. While QIA is very critical of the Nutrition North food subsidy, that program has set aside $62 million over the next 5 years to also support local hunters. On today's In Focus, we dissected the federal government, what it means, what it doesn't mean to Indigenous people, and we'll have highlights after the break.
And spring has sprung for proof. Here's Thursday's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, sunny skies and a high of 5 for Halifax, Charlottetown, and St. John's. Sunny and -5 for Nain, -2 under the sun for Cartwright. +6 with some showers in Montreal, a rain-snow mix in 8 in Saguenay. +8 for Sarnia and London with showers, +4 in Sault Ste. Marie with snow. +6 in Thunder Bay, 3 above for Wawa with snow. +2 in Puckatawagan, -10 and sunny skies for Churchill. +4 in Winnipeg, +8 in Dauphin, Barons River, and Princess Harbour. +9 in Regina, 14 above under sunny skies for Swift Current. +8 in Meadow Lake and Buffalo Narrows. Welcome back. Well, it is the first day of spring and it's warm in the Northwest Territories. And that's a problem because many spring events might be canceled across the region because of the heat. But the biggest concern for residents living in remote communities is the early closure of winter roads. This is how Northwest Territories ice road looks as it melts. Roads usually stay open till the end of March, but yesterday some regions hit a record-breaking 28 degrees. Take that here. The deteriorating conditions have led to many roads only being open at night, leaving some travelers scrambling to make it back home.
Usually people do their last-minute runs before, I think, around the middle of this month. So having it closed early it's awful. It was really melting. Like the roofs on the houses were dripping like crazy, and people walking around sweaters. So I know everybody that was in Betchico left, and they traveled all night, I believe, and I know some made it in early this morning.
Prisoner advocates say Canada's correctional services isn't doing enough to help inmates deal with addictions. Canada's correctional investigator Ivan Zinger called on the federal prison service to provide adequate treatment programs for prisoners who are addicted to opioids. One ex-prisoner says there was no addiction help for him when he was released, and he feared he would end up behind bars again. The service says 66% of prisoners have accessed treatment in the last 2 years.
Indigenization is a strategic initiative many universities are taking part in across Canada. Some students from a Manitoba university organized a panel discussion and shared different perspectives on the topic. Ashley Branson brings us more.
The panel was organized by the University of Winnipeg Students Association. Morgan Brightnose is president. He says it's important to have discussions on Indigenization, the process of influencing the way other people view Indigenous culture.
I think that often we're excluded from many discussions, and I think particularly here we're excluded from discussion of Indigenization itself. So I think it's important that the Student Union provides a platform to center our Indigenous voices.
Cameron Adams is working on his BA in Indigenous Studies. In 2016, the University of Winnipeg made it mandatory for all students to take a basic Indigenous Studies course. He calls that a move forward.
Indigenization and Indigenous course requirement can bring the accountability up and as well educate people so that we don't have people in 10 years that say, well, what are residential schools? What was the 60s scoop? What are Indigenous languages? So we actually have that knowledge, because with knowledge comes accountability and action.
Lorena Fontaine is an academic lead in the university's Office of Indigenous Affairs.
I think that the most important thing for Indigenization is to look at the students' needs.
Fontaine says she's happy with how the beginning stages of Indigenization are working out on campus, but there's still a lot more opportunity for change. Ashley Branson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Today on In Focus, panelists unpacked yesterday's federal budget. What's in it for Indigenous people? What's not? What should be? What does any of it mean in the context of reconciliation? Does the annual doling out of cash from Ottawa actually perpetuate a system that is not working for First Nations? Are multi-year funding promises little more than a carrot dangled in front of us that we don't get to eat? Here are some highlights.
They tout about it being about the children, but in fact, this budget is lacking a gender-based analysis, an Indigenous and a human rights analysis, because you have, this $1.2 billion in funding for Jordan's Principle. However, it's flat funding, so there's no increase or accounting for population growth, and we're the fastest growing population. No account for inflation, and they're currently denying all of the children of Indigenous women who should be registered under S3 and also under the Gale case, the unstated paternity case. So we're talking about thousands of children that are being denied. And we have to remember, this is no gift. They don't get to be patted on the back for it. They've been dragged to this budget kicking and screaming by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal and a fifth non-compliance order. So this is nothing to celebrate.
One good thing about this that's so critical is in terms of Indigenous entrepreneurs, in terms of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. This budget did a lot in terms of a multi-million-dollar, like a prosperity fund for First Nations. Like First Nation entrepreneurs, like any entrepreneurs, the issue is access to capital, and First Nations, more than any, are faced with that because of the land ownership restrictions. They can't use collateral, so they need the capital. And absent that kind of full property rights, First Nations need capital, and this budget goes a long way towards providing that. The First Nation Major Projects Coalition has applauded the budget in terms of providing over $100 million for First Nation communities to secure large resource projects. There's economic voices in the Indigenous community that need to also be heard as well in this.
There has been support in this budget for infrastructure, and the gap is significant. It is at least $30, if not $40 billion. And the Government of Canada will not be able to address this gap on its own. And the only way you can do this is to try and create the right processes in place, be it public-private partnerships or some other type of model, to attract private capital to address this. And I didn't see anything like that in the budget, which is very unfortunate.
We're about to go on a tour of a museum full of curiosities from around the world.
That's after the break, and here's tomorrow's weather.
Picking back up in northern Alberta, where the sun is out. +8 for high level, +11 in Fort McMurray, 14 above for Medicine Hat, 16 under the sun in Calgary. +15 in Tofino, Vancouver, and Victoria, 20 above for Bella Coola. +12 in Dease Lake, 18 above for Prince Rupert. In the Yukon, -2 in Old Crow, +13 for Whitehorse and Watson Lake, 11 above in Fort Liard, Trout Lake, and Fort Simpson. -16 and snow for Sax Harbor, -3 with snow for Paulatuck. -15 in Baker Lake, 19 below for Chesterfield, -23 in Repulse Bay, -28 in Clyde River and Igloolik.
Welcome back. A museum located in the Old Port of Montreal explores the unique world of cabinets and curiosities and takes visitors on a journey around the globe. Danielle Rochette has more.
The exhibition, Into the Wonder Room, pays tribute to the beauty and strangeness of the mysterious and singular universe. It brings together over 1,000 rare, often exotic, and unusual objects. It honors explorers, scientists, and collectors from different backgrounds, all driven by curiosity and a quest for knowledge. As the exhibition's director explains, this display is a kind of history of the origin of museums.
Les objets commencent à être collectionnés au 16e siècle avec le début des explorations. Les explorateurs rapportent en Europe des objets qu'on trouve absolument fascinants et des collectionneurs, donc des gens qui sont des aristocrates, souhaitent les acquérir pour les montrer.
Fantastic creatures, naturalized animals and scientific instruments are also part of the exhibit. Among the most surprising elements are the naturalized deers, whose antlers have been intertwined in the battle causing their death, or the albino moose.
Mais je vous dirais que notre orignal albinos suscite beaucoup d'intérêt auprès du public. Donc, c'est un animal qui est impressionnant et qui attire beaucoup l'attention.
Also displayed are extinct species. Maud Bouchard-Dupont, an exhibition guide, highlights a rare specimen of a passenger pigeon that has disappeared.
C'est tellement nombreux, mais tellement chassé qu'il a disparu en 1904. Et quand on voit cette espèce-là, on réalise véritablement l'effet que l'homme peut avoir sur son environnement, puis comment notre environnement est fragile aussi et cette nécessité de le préserver.
Among all those curiosities, you also can find Inuit glasses, Inuit parka, snowshoes, and a small birch canoe.
Les Européens ne connaissent pas l'Amérique, bien entendu, au 16e siècle. Ils la découvrent à travers les explorateurs qui vont rapporter certains de ces objets en témoignage de leur visite en Amérique. Et ces objets, donc, d'Amérique comme d'Océanie, comme d'Asie et comme du Grand Nord aussi, vont attirer la curiosité, donc vont avoir un certain intérêt pour les gens qui découvrent, dans le fond, le monde, la terre sur laquelle ils habitent.
This unique exhibition will go until January 2020. Daniel Rochette, APTN National News, Montreal.
Some interesting stuff there. For the second year in a row, Finland has taken the top spot as the world's happiest country. That's according to an annual report from the United Nations. It's the second year in a row for the Nordic country, with Denmark and Norway following close behind, taking the 2 and 3 spots. Canada drops to 9th place this year, just below New Zealand and ahead of Austria. The ranking is based on factors like economic wealth, life expectancy, social support, and levels of government corruption. The report does note that overall happiness levels have decreased worldwide despite continued economic growth. Findings there.
Maybe stuff doesn't make people happy. Huh, imagine.
Maybe not.
All this economic growth and we're still losing our happiness.
Well, I'm still pretty happy.
I'm okay.
That's your APTN National News for this Wednesday. You can always find more on our website, aptnnews.ca, and download the APTN News app. I'm Dennis Ward.
And you can catch that episode of In Focus dissecting the federal budget here as it reruns tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern and 10 a.m. Central. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a great night.